Hi everyone, it's Jill Foster here again for Penny Black and the second in a series of 5 videos designed to demonstrate basic techniques for inking and stamping with our brushstroke stamps. And in today's video I will be sharing how you can use your distress inks and re-inkers to achieve a detailed and no-line watercolor look with our Lilacs brushstroke stamp. And here is a list of all the supplies that I will be using to do this technique, and I will put this back up at the end of the video, so if you'd like to look at it in more detail at that time, then you can hit pause and just view it right up on screen. So to begin, I am working in my stamp positioning tool. I'm using the Misty by My Sweet Petunia, and I'm stamping onto hot press watercolor paper. It's 140 pounds and it has a nice smooth surface that will help capture the details of the stamp, but also allow me to add water onto this at the end and do some painting. I began by inking up the flower portion or the blooms portion of the stamp using a miniature distress ink pad, and this is the color of Broken China. And I'm just going to do multiple impressions just to be sure that I get it to the darkness that I want it to be. It's a pretty light color, so I'm just doing it a couple of times. You did see at the very beginning if I got a little bit onto the leaves that are up on the top portion of this, I did sort of use my finger to wipe that off. You could use a paper towel or a baby wipe to do so. And I'm just getting both sides here and stamping that down. And I just keep going until I am happy with how dark it is. Next, I'm going to use another miniature distress ink pad. This is the color of Mowed Lawn. And I'm going to use this on the leaves and the stem down below. And the nice small size of these mini ink pads make it easy to get right in where you want to cover without overlapping onto areas that you don't want that color of ink. Just like I did with the blue flowers up at the top, I'll do a few impressions with the green just till it's at the intensity that I want it to be. And there were just a few leaves here around the outer edges, and I'm just getting those with the corner of the ink pad, just sort of tilting it and adjusting it. And then stamping that down. And I really love these two colors together, this Mowed Lawn and the Broken China. This stamp I think also would look beautiful in really rich purples and reds. And you can see here I'm just getting several impressions with that Mowed Lawn color. So now I'm ready to take this out of my stamp positioning tool. You could certainly just stop at this point. I think it's really pretty and you have lots of great colors, but I just wanted to take it a few steps further. Now because the Distress ink is a water-soluble ink, I can go in now and using just a brush with a little bit of water, I can sort of move that ink around and blend it so that this has even more of a watercolor look. So that's all I'm doing here is just working on those flowers and just using plain old water to sort of blend that around. But I am being careful not to get it too wet or puddle up too much because I want to keep the detail that's included in the stamp. I don't want it to become all one big blue blob. I want to keep those individual little flowers going or keep them there. Now here I'm just showing stamping this one time onto the center of my panel. This is a 5x7 panel. But you could also do this off to the side. You could position the stamp and stamp it multiple times to create like a garden effect where there's a whole bunch of those growing. I think it would look really pretty around the perimeter of the card with a sentiment in the center. There's just really so many options with these brushstroke stamps and with this technique. So once you've got the technique down, then you can really get creative with how you position the stamp and what colors you use to keep giving it lots of different looks and new life as you're making cards with it. So once I finish doing that for all of the blooms, I want to add a little more shading. So I'm actually using Distress Re-Inkers as watercolors. You could also use your watercolors that you have on hand. And this first color is Broken China. I like how I can use the coordinating colors, and I have the reinkers on hand because I have the stamp pads. You just need the tiniest little dot. You could put it on acrylic block, or here I'm using an ink palette so I can see what my colors are. And I'm just randomly picking and choosing some of those flowers to darken up and add this additional shading to. I'm just painting it right on top. And I did dry this before I went in and added that additional reinker on top. Now I've grabbed another color, and this color is Faded Jeans. And this is just a little bit darker, and it's more of a true blue than a turquoise blue, and I like the variation that it provides. Now some of those little blooms or buds you can leave without putting any color on top, and that can be your lightest color. And you can just play around with different variations that you wanted. You could even pull in some purple at this point, or I think the color Chipped Sapphire Distress Ink Reinker would work really well too. And I'm just working my way around the stamp and adding that on. And I think this is really relaxing. This is something once you've done your stamping, you could just move this in front of the TV or anywhere handy and work on adding some of this painting to it because it doesn't have to be in your stamp positioning tool any longer. Now for these leaves, I'm first just blending the stamping that I did with water because again that was done with Distress ink so it can blend with water. And while it's still wet, I'm using Evergreen Bough Distress Ink Reinker just to add some extra shading. And I love how on this large area of the leaf while things are still wet, the two colors, the base stamping color and the reinker color used as a watercolor, they just really blend beautifully together. And really start to see those leaves come to life. And if you have any question about where you want to put the darker color, the lighter color, you can just look at the packaging that comes with the stamp. There's usually a lot of good ideas. And actually the stamp itself will give you some hint as where to put those darker and lighter colors because some of that is built right into the detail that's on the stamp itself. So again, working on another leaf first, just putting water down and blending that Distress ink stamping. And then while it's still wet, going in and putting in that Distress ink reinker and blending that out with water as needed. And this just gives that really beautiful hand-painted look of watercolor painting. It doesn't have any outline, so it just is such a stunning look. And I think a lot of people just can't even believe that it was stamped. It just looks like it was hand painted, which is really fun. The looser you want the watercolor to look, the more water I recommend using. And if you want it to keep more of that detail in there, then you definitely will want to use less water on your brush. I also like with these stamps, like here on the leaves, you can see they do leave that highlight in there, that white area, which really adds a lot of drama to your stamping. That's something I struggle with leaving in when I'm coloring in an image. And I love that on these, it's just right there for me. And I don't have to even think about where it should be and remember to leave that area white. And I will get just some of these little leaves up here doing the same thing. Now once that's done, I'm using Gathered Twigs Distress Ink Reinker and just very lightly adding some centers to those flowers. This is the tiniest detail, but I think it really finishes things off. And I was sure that everything was dry before moving on to this next step. If it was still wet and I went to do this, it would start to sort of bleed and blend together, but since everything's dry, you can just put it right there on top. And you don't have to do every single bloom. You can just sort of get a few here and there to give a hint at that detail. Next, I'm going to use that same gathered twigs color to get these sort of branches or on the stems. And I'm using the silver black velvet round brushes, and I have all of that also listed in the supply list, including the size of brushes that I'm using. But anything with a very fine tip should work well for this. And because that was stamped with the Distress ink, that green ink on the stems, I don't want to use too much water here either, because that will start to blend beneath because it's a water-soluble ink. So I'm just picking up that Distress ink re-inker, and I do not have too much of the re-inker or the water on my brush. And that is complete. So when I was done here, I just snapped a picture of the paper once I was finished painting it. And then I did go ahead and use this 5x7 stamped panel to make a card. And here's a look at that card design. It's similar to the one I shared in the previous video number 1 in this series. And I will link to you down below a video where I made, it's a different card, but the same technique for masking and inking that center portion of the card. I thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed today's video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also connect with Penny Black on Facebook, Pinterest, Instagram, Twitter, and our website and blog, and I'll link to all of those down for you in the YouTube description box below. And stay tuned for more brushstroke basic videos coming soon.